I am continuing to part 2 of our professional teaching portfolio for an art teaching position. I'm using as a guide Melanie Buffington's article that was in May 2011 Art Education Journal. And in the part 1, we went over a lot of the importance and why we're doing and the who, what, where, when of a portfolio. We're going to continue right now with part 2, which has to do with, again, lesson plans and what the people interviewing are going to want to see in this portfolio. In this article, again, there was all these people, hundreds of supervisors and people who interview what they said about was important. Assessment did come up as an important thing with these lesson plans. For each lesson that you include in your portfolio, you should, very important, that you list very clearly your objectives, and you are showing that throughout the progress of the students making the artwork. And then, how did you know as the art teacher that they got that information? So that assessment is very important. Was it a quiz? Was it them playing a game as a group with questions and acting out? And there's just so many ways to assess. Was it the teacher interviewing them with a checklist? Was it a group discussion and the students taking notes and then having raising hand? There's so many ways for assessment, and you would want to show how you assess this lesson in hardcore. You can use a rubric, you can use a checklist, but good advice is that principal or the people interviewing, they have to show that their school is making the grade and following state guidelines on assessing, making sure everybody's doing what they're saying and moving along. All right, and also when you're assessing, remember it's important for you to know if you hit your target so that you can tweak that lesson or change it. What did the students show you? We are, as art educators, we should be, and we are student-based, about child-centered and art-centered. So it needs to be that we really look at if the students have shown us something in this lesson. Know that you can tweak your lesson as you're putting it in your portfolio of how you would do it the next time. What did you learn from? And just make it as the new lesson plan. Because the more we teach a lesson, the more we learn and the more the students show us. So you're going to be doing those rubrics in there. The lesson plans and units should correlate to that assessment. They're going to look to see everything you said you were going to make sure that was an objective, that you're assessing it in some way. So make sure that's an important thing in this article, that it says that the assessment has to really match up. Unless it was an informal assessment, and then you would list that. The portfolio should show your big ideas, or big ideas turned into years ago, 15 years ago was big ideas, and then it turned into essential questions, and now it turned into enduring ideas. So we keep switching things around, we keep switching terms. Basically, what's the big stuff, the big questions, the big learning that you're getting across? So that has to be right up there and being told in your lessons of what the big idea or theme is for your lessons, the objectives and the assessment. So make sure those big ideas are coming out strong, and then everything is following after that. I don't know if you can really see this, but this is some images of how a page might look. So this is one sample, and I will post images on the blog with this. All right, and look, there's only 4 pictures on that page. There's only one here. Let's take a look at this page 1 here. Here is the lesson. It's about Korean folk art. It has a very quick overview of what the lesson was about. It's like 2-3 sentences, the most. All right, then the key concepts, the big ideas, the enduring concepts. all right, or the key concepts, the essential questions. And then the objectives, all right? So don't want 100 there. This is not really like, you know, a listing of many, many. This should only be a few that is threaded throughout your lesson and then shown in your rubric, okay? So that's a good way to do it. You want to list, page 2 has materials, and references. Is it teacher-made sample? Is it give credit to the art and artwork that you're using for this? And then here is a process of 4 images of showing step 1, step 2, step 3 of the students planning and sketching and doing their first draft and doing this, and it is the process of the students learning. All right, so that's an example of how you would lay out the lesson. Here's another page here. Students learn about folk art and blah, 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 and then students painted the animals they see in their own community and give them texture using oil pastels. So only 3. It's telling the story. It's not all finished artwork yet. All right, okay. Images of student art. It is quite important to showcase in your portfolio what students learned. Images of student artwork and the process that they utilize to make their art can significantly help in showing their learning. When making selections, this is really important, when you're making selections of the student artwork for your teaching portfolio, include multiple students' work and a range of what the students do. This is really important, that you show that, you know, the different students and how you don't want to show all the same, oh, and here they did this. You want to show unique takes on it. Or you want to show how personally meaningful, and that was something in this research, that the students' personal meaning within their artwork was a really big, important thing that needed to be in the selected images of the students' artwork. All right, include the age of the student, this is very important, the title of the lesson or unit, a statement about the art making process, and a sentence or 2 about the meaning of the artwork. Think about including images that show the entire art making process, including students working on their art. So you're going to want to label the artwork. It should never be that there is a picture on your page and you don't have a descriptor. Years ago when I was going through my student teachers' portfolios, I didn't know if it was a famous artist's work, if it was a teacher sample, or if it was a student artwork, because that some people were not labeling and assuming you were in their head going, oh, so you have to give credit. So you're going to use the first name of a student, their, you know, the age, and you give student artwork, or student artwork image number 1. And so you're telling again the story. All right, images of your own personal artwork. This is very, very important. And as a teacher who, you know, I've worked in a few different colleges, some more traditional, some much more contemporary with, you know, shock art involved in an expression. And if you have artwork out there that's controversial, it's out there. And a principal can Google your name and your blog will come up, or something on Facebook or wherever. Just make sure that if you're going to be a teacher, you really keep the images out there in alignment with working with children, with someone else's child, by the way. So if you've done very controversial, very, you know, and I'm not saying socially charged, sometimes talking about the problems we have as societies within our art making can be very, very powerful. But if there's other statements that a principal may say, oh, you know what, that's a little bit too much for me, trusting that you're not going to be discussing that in the classroom, even at the high school level. So you have to be really careful about the artwork that you include and your websites that out there and your content. Sometimes I've had student teachers pull down all their previous artwork and start all over, because they went to college to be an art teacher and they realized that classes they took in the past were promoting themselves more as a shock artist. And so keep that in mind. So the images of your personal artwork in your portfolio, again, you don't have to put it in the big one. You can have a separate, or you might put it at the end of your portfolio. It has to be your best artwork. It should not be anything mediocre. It should be you as an adult. Don't be slipping something in that you did in high school because you thought it was really great, unless it's really, really great, okay? Show that you're a 2D artist. Show that you can do 3D. If you've done fashion design or if you've done clay very well, then include those things. It'll show your breadth and your depth. That's what you want in the end. If you are mainly drawing and painting, then show you do watercolor, you do oils, you do this, you do still life. So try to tell it that way to make it diverse. But if you have expertise in other 3D or whatever, or photography or graphics, or it could be one singular project you did, put that in there. They need to see that you're an artist and you have skills, and you engage the viewer with your artwork. If you have done special projects, like I know when I worked at a particular college, we did a cafe raising money for the arts, and we had sold artwork, we made artwork. That was its own little binder. Then we did an art show with Pete Seeger, and we did a whole project with schools, with community agency. That became its own book. And Peter Max, all the schools that were involved and all the student teachers and all the fieldwork students that were involved, they made their own section of that project. You could be volunteering, a Special Olympics in arts and whatever. You can have its own section or its own little book if it's worthy of it. Otherwise, it would be attached in your portfolio after your student work or whatever. So your teaching portfolio would have you doing all these special projects, and your professional portfolio of your art may have some things that you've done with the community too, like the largest finger painting in the world, twice. That was a lot of mess, but a lot of fun. But I had to sell it at what it was. So remember that you're telling a story. Yeah, gee, wow, that was the largest finger painting in the world, but why was it important for the community? What did we learn from doing it? What was the engagement collaboratively? How did we plan? It was very involved, and I had to tell the story visually, but also with written word and with testimonies, okay? That became its own little snippet book, all right? Okay, so we talked about making sure that a principal doesn't get shocked at some of your artwork. And even in this article, which is 10 years ago, it still rings clear that a principal doesn't want a lawsuit from a parent that comes in and says, your art teacher showed images of this to my child and my religion or my background or my this or my that or my upbringing with my children. We don't do that. So remember, they are guarded for a reason. Schools are entrusted with people's children. You are entrusted. And so the question and the statement in this was, do you include all your nudes that you sat in a university and drew all your nudes of all the body parts and this and that? Well, that principal might think that you're going to present that to your students. So the supervisors that were interviewed for this research said best to leave it out. Do hands, feet, contour drawings, but full nudes are more for private lessons and institutes of art that have that liberty that parents sign off on their students, their teenagers usually, being able to use nude models. So keep that in mind. Something as you think benign as that could be a problem. I had a student who brought in a big textbook of Keith Haring. it's Keith Haring. We learned about Keith Haring. He has all the stick figures. Well, Keith Haring has a side of him as an artist that was very, very provocative, of body parts in his drawings, with a lot of sexual innuendos and a very explicit sexual engagement with his stick figures in one of his big books. Well, at the high school, I watched a group of young teenagers look through and say, and they're looking at the images in this textbook that was, you know, in the library at a university of Keith Haring. We teach him at the elementary. And one said, "This is pornography," and walked away. So make sure that you really have done your research on the full range of what you're putting in your artwork. So yes, we teach about Keith Haring, but you have to make sure that what you're presenting to students, that you filtered it and you screened it, and you don't assume that a book doesn't have things. So you always have to make sure all your images could be shown to the parents, the principals, and even grandma. All right? So make sure that your audience of the Who, you're catering to being very sensitive to them. All right? So in your own teaching portfolio, also, you can show images about your artistic development with a little, you know, what this artwork is important to, as you as a developing artist, you engaging. Items that art educators may not consider offensive may be offensive to others. For instance, one curriculum supervisor noted that the applicant's metalwork made a principal uncomfortable because it had metal letters that all look like weapons. But we're artists, we express. Well, a principal might say, "Oh, you're not doing that with my high school students." So that censoring of your artwork for the who's sitting across from you is really important. Again, when you made it, you might have a statement, you might be expressing, you might have been in some art classes that were not for art educators who have a different audience. So make sure that you really think of who's sitting in that chair. All right, one principal thought, oh, we just did that, okay. So bottom line is your artistic portfolio needs to have a breadth of ability and the depth of ability. All right, keep in mind that although people who are trained in visual arts see differently, you know, people in the art ed field who might be interviewing may know, oh, that's silk screening, that's intaglio, but you do need to label everything. Okay, so that was the last on that. All right, so this is the end of section 2. I'm going to do section 3, which has to do about how to organize it, and a little bit more about finishing the good things that are in this article. So end of part 2, see you part 3.